there is something within you, always speaking, always reacting, always judging. Most of the time, you don't even notice it, yet it quietly shapes your decisions, your emotions, and ultimately your life. Most people believe their life is shaped by external events. What happens to them, what others say, or the opportunities they receive. But what often goes unnoticed is that long before anything takes form in the outer world, it is first created within the mind. The mind works quietly, constantly generating thoughts, and these thoughts do not simply disappear. They leave traces. When a thought repeats itself enough times, it begins to feel familiar, and what feels familiar starts to feel true. This is how a simple thought slowly transforms into a belief. A person who repeatedly thinks, "I am not good enough," may not question it at first. It may arise subtly in moments of challenge or comparison, but over time, this thought gains strength. It begins to influence how that person sees themselves. It shapes their confidence, their decisions, and even the risks they are willing to take. Without realizing it, they start avoiding situations where they might fail, not because they truly lack ability, but because the mind has already convinced them of a limitation. In the same way, a mind that is constantly focused on problems will begin to perceive the world as a place full of obstacles. Even neutral situations may be interpreted negatively. A small delay becomes a major frustration. A simple comment feels like criticism. The mind filters reality based on its internal patterns. And what you experience as reality is often just a reflection of what is happening inside. This process is not loud or obvious. It does not announce itself. It happens in the background through small, repeated thoughts that seem insignificant in the moment. But over time, these thoughts build a framework through which you interpret everything. They influence how you respond to people, how you handle challenges, and how you see your future. The danger is not that the mind creates thoughts. That is its nature. The danger is that these thoughts go unobserved and unquestioned. When you are unaware of them, you begin to follow them automatically. A negative thought arises, and without pause, it affects your mood. Your mood influences your behavior, and your behavior shapes your outcomes. In this way, something as subtle as a passing thought can set off a chain reaction that affects your entire day, and eventually your life. On the other hand, if the mind is filled with supportive and empowering thoughts, the effect is just as powerful. A person who consistently thinks, "I will find a way," begins to approach challenges with openness rather than fear. They take action where others hesitate. They persist where others give up. Over time, their experiences reinforce their belief, and a positive cycle is created. What becomes clear is that the mind is not just reacting to life. It is actively shaping it. Every thought contributes to the direction your life takes. Whether you are aware of it or not, the patterns within your mind are quietly influencing the way you live, the choices you make, and the reality you experience each day. Most reactions do not begin in the moment. They begin long before it, shaped by patterns that have been repeated so many times they feel automatic. When a situation arises, the mind does not pause to carefully examine it from a neutral place. Instead, it immediately searches through past experiences, memories, and emotional imprints, and then delivers a response that feels instant and natural. This is why two people can experience the same event but react in completely different ways. The difference is not in the event itself, but in the unseen patterns within the mind. A single word, a tone of voice, or even a facial expression can trigger a reaction that seems disproportionate to what is actually happening. Someone might feel hurt, defensive, or anxious without fully understanding why. In that moment, it feels as though the reaction is caused by the present situation. But in reality, it is often rooted in something much deeper. The mind connects the current experience with past moments that carried similar emotional weight, and without awareness, it responds as if those past experiences are happening again. This process happens so quickly that it feels like there is no gap between what occurs and how you respond. A thought appears, an emotion follows, and then an action takes place. There is no conscious decision involved. It becomes a chain reaction. For example, a critical comment might immediately trigger self-doubt. That self-doubt can turn into withdrawal or silence. Later, the mind might replay the situation again and again, strengthening the same emotional response. All of this unfolds automatically, without any deliberate choice. Over time, these repeated reactions form habits. The mind becomes conditioned to respond in certain ways to certain triggers. If someone has often reacted with anger when feeling disrespected, anger becomes the default response. If someone has repeatedly avoided difficult situations due to fear, avoidance becomes the natural pattern. These habits create a sense of predictability, not because life is predictable, but because the mind keeps responding in the same way. The challenge is that when reactions are automatic, they feel justified. The mind quickly creates explanations to support them. It tells you that your reaction is reasonable, that the situation demanded it, that there was no other way to respond. This makes it even harder to recognize that the reaction itself was not a conscious choice, but a conditioned response. Without awareness, this cycle continues. The same triggers lead to the same reactions, and the same reactions lead to similar outcomes. This reinforces the patterns within the mind, making them even stronger over time. A person may begin to believe that this is simply who they are, that their reactions define them, when in reality, these responses are learned and reinforced behaviors. There is a subtle but powerful difference between reacting and responding. A reaction is immediate, driven by past conditioning. A response, however, involves a moment of awareness. Even a brief pause can interrupt the automatic chain. In that small space, there is the possibility to see what is happening, to recognize the pattern, and to choose a different way of engaging with the situation. When this awareness is absent, the mind continues to operate on autopilot, guiding behavior in ways that often go unnoticed. What feels like a natural response is often the result of patterns that have never been questioned, shaping actions and experiences in a quiet but persistent way. There is a quiet assumption most people live with, and it goes unquestioned. The belief that every thought that appears in the mind is a reflection of who they are. When a thought says, "I am not capable," it is taken personally. When a thought says, "Something will go wrong," it is believed without hesitation. In this way, the boundary between the thinker and the thought becomes blurred until it feels as though there is no difference at all. But if you begin to observe closely, something unusual becomes clear. Thoughts are not constant. They appear, they stay for a moment, and then they disappear. One moment, the mind is filled with doubt. The next moment, it may shift to something completely unrelated. If thoughts truly defined who you are, then your identity would be changing every second, moving from confidence to fear, from clarity to confusion, without any stability. Yet, there is something within you that remains present through all of these changes. That presence is the part of you that notices the thoughts. It is the awareness behind them. When a thought arises, there is something that recognizes it. When a feeling appears, there is something that experiences it. This awareness does not come and go in the same way thoughts do. It remains quietly observing everything that passes through the mind. The difficulty arises because from an early stage, there is a habit of identifying with whatever appears internally. A negative thought is not seen as just a passing mental event. It is taken as truth. A strong emotion is not experienced with distance. It is absorbed completely. This identification gives thoughts a kind of power they would not have otherwise. Instead of being temporary, they begin to shape how you see yourself and the world around you. Imagine sitting by a road and watching cars pass by. Each car represents a thought. Some are loud, some are fast, some are distracting. But no matter what kind of car passes, you remain where you are, simply observing. Now imagine stepping into every car that passes, allowing each one to carry you away. This is what happens when you identify with your thoughts. Instead of observing them, you become involved in them, and they begin to determine your direction. When you believe that you are your thoughts, you lose the ability to question them. Every doubt feels real. Every fear feels justified. Every judgment feels accurate. There is no space between you and what the mind produces. But when you begin to see that thoughts are simply events in the mind, not definitions of who you are, a separation naturally emerges. This separation does not require force or suppression. It begins with simple observation. You notice a thought arising, and instead of immediately following it, you recognize it as just a thought. It may still be there, but its influence starts to weaken. You are no longer completely absorbed in it. You are aware of it. In that awareness, there is a sense of stillness that is not affected by the constant movement of the mind. Thoughts may continue to come and go, but they no longer carry the same weight. They are seen for what they are, temporary, changing, and not entirely within your control. What you begin to realize is that the mind is something you have, not something you are. It is a tool, constantly active, constantly producing content. But behind that activity, there is a deeper presence that remains steady, unaffected by the fluctuations of thought. As this becomes clearer, the grip of the mind starts to loosen, and thoughts lose their ability to define your experience so completely. There is a small moment that most people overlook, and yet it holds more power than it seems. It is the moment between what happens and how you respond to it. For many, this moment is so brief that it feels like it does not exist at all. Something occurs, and immediately there is a reaction. Words are spoken, emotions take over, actions follow. It feels automatic, almost as if there was never a choice. But when awareness begins to develop, this hidden space starts to reveal itself. Awareness does not stop thoughts from appearing, and it does not prevent emotions from arising. Instead, it allows you to see them as they are happening. A thought forms, as an emotion begins to build, and rather than being immediately carried away by it, you notice it. This simple act of noticing creates a gap. It may only last a second at first, but within that second, something shifts. You are no longer completely identified with the reaction. You are witnessing it. In that moment of witnessing, the intensity of the reaction often begins to soften. What once felt overwhelming becomes something you can observe. You might notice the tightening in your chest, the rush of thoughts in your mind, the urge to respond quickly. Before awareness, these sensations would immediately turn into action. With awareness, they are experienced without the same urgency. There is a sense that you do not have to act on them right away. This space is where choice becomes possible. Without it, behavior is driven by habit and conditioning. With it, there is the opportunity to respond differently. A harsh word may arise in your mind, but instead of speaking it instantly, you see it for what it is. An impulse to react with anger may appear, but instead of following it, you pause. In that pause, you can consider a different response, one that is not dictated by past patterns, but guided by clarity. The more this awareness is practiced, the more natural the pause becomes. It begins to extend itself into everyday situations. Conversations slow down internally, even if they appear normal externally. Reactions that once felt unavoidable start to feel optional. You begin to realize that you are not bound to respond in the same ways you always have. There is flexibility where there was once rigidity. This does not mean that you will always choose perfectly or that difficult emotions will disappear. There will still be moments of frustration, impatience, or fear. The difference is that these experiences are no longer controlling you in the same way. They arise, but they are met with awareness rather than immediate action. Even if a reaction does occur, it is noticed more quickly and the cycle can be interrupted sooner. Over time, this shift begins to change how you experience situations altogether. Challenges are no longer met with automatic resistance. Instead, there is a sense of openness, a willingness to observe before engaging. This creates a different quality of interaction with the world. Situations that once triggered strong reactions may start to feel less intense, not because they have changed, but because your relationship to them has changed. As awareness deepens, the mind becomes less dominant. It still produces thoughts and impulses, but they no longer dictate every action. There is a growing sense of stability, as if you are no longer being pulled in every direction by whatever arises internally. The space created by awareness becomes a place of quiet control, where responses are chosen rather than compelled, and where each moment holds the possibility of a different way of being. Most people try to change their life by adjusting what is outside, seeking better situations, better results, better circumstances. But no matter how much the external world shifts, the inner patterns of the mind continue to shape how those changes are experienced. This is why the same struggles often reappear in different forms. The environment may change, but the mind carries its habits into every new situation. When the mind is not understood, it becomes something that quietly directs behavior without being questioned. It influences choices, reactions, and perceptions in ways that feel natural but are often limiting. A person may repeatedly find themselves in similar difficulties, not realizing that the source is not outside, but within the patterns they have been reinforcing over time. Mastery of the mind begins with understanding these patterns. It is not about controlling every thought or forcing the mind into silence. It is about recognizing how it operates, seeing the tendencies that shape behavior, and becoming familiar with the triggers that lead to certain reactions. This understanding creates a shift from being driven by the mind to observing it with clarity. As this awareness deepens, decisions begin to change. Actions are no longer based purely on habit or impulse. There is a sense of intention behind them. A person starts to respond in ways that align more with clarity than conditioning. Small changes in thinking lead to small changes in behavior, and over time, these small changes accumulate into something much larger. The outer life begins to reflect this inner shift. Situations are approached differently. Challenges are handled with more steadiness, and opportunities are recognized where they were once overlooked. What once felt automatic becomes something that can be shaped, and life begins to move in a direction that is no longer dictated by unconscious patterns. And so, you begin to see nothing outside has truly been holding you back. It was never the situation, never the people, never the timing. It was the unseen patterns within your own mind. But the moment you become aware, moment you stop blindly following every thought, something shifts. You are no longer being carried. You begin to stand, not against the world. Within yourself, there is a quiet strength in that place, a stillness that does not depend on circumstances, a clarity that is not shaken by passing thoughts. And from that place, you move differently, you speak differently, you live differently. The mind may still speak, but it no longer decides who you are, because now you are aware, and awareness is where true freedom begins.